there's the... All right, so last week we started playing with MongoDB. This week, I want to start talking about authentication. So this is something that we can use the database for, that you're going to need to use for the practice problem statement, which we do have available now, and I'm going to go ahead and link that in Slack at the end of the class today, as well as the real one, because there will probably be, I haven't actually read the practice statement yet, but there's probably going to be such thing as a user account. That's going to be at the core of it. So I want to go over an authentication method using tokens. It's fairly easy. There's just a lot of steps to make it work. And it's not true to what we would do in the real world. In the real world, there would be an authentication service that's separate from our app, because we're more secure that way, probably using Ping ID or something like that. But making our own in-house one will work for the competition, and you get a little bit of a sense of how Ping ID and Azure Authenticator, Google Authenticator, all those apps will work. Obviously, we're not doing two-factor. That's a bit much, and usually you have to pay for that. But what we're going to be going over is creating a couple of endpoints that can create a user, that can log a user in and log them out, and a middleware function that can check the token to make sure that who is trying to do a thing is who they say they are based on their token. So we're going to use the same API that we did from last week. Let me share my screen. Oh, just looking at my net worth dissolve there. Anyway, so projects, and what was it? Express demo? Oh, Mongo demo. So we're going to use that same exact project because we've already got it all spun up, and I assume that your databases are still up and running. So, and we don't necessarily need this if you ended up not copying it. This is just a little pet peeve of mine to remove the X powered by, but it's still definitely good to have, and it's nice and simple. So we're going to create a new model. So we've got an employee model here. We could probably just get rid of this. And we're going to create a new users model. And the users model is going to be pretty much as simple as we can make it. It's not going to be like an employee or something, because an employee may not have rights to the system. The authentication should just be for authentication. At least that's what the standard is. So we're going to create a new model called user.js, or user model rather. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention this. We will also be hooking this up to a UI as well. So we can log in from a UI, confirm to log in, and then a log out button. That's what the goal is for today. So, but first we're going to focus on the endpoints. So I'm just literally copying everything over from employee model. We can get rid of current dates. No need for that. Everything that says employee, we can change that to user. And change Goose to user. We can get rid of all of this as well. So when I say as simple as possible, I'm talking username, password, and if they've got a token, their token. We could also do other fancy stuff like, when's the last time they logged in, how long their session is going to last. And technically, this isn't a session. A session is an open connection that stays open while the user's doing their thing. And that would be more used for things like banks. They have to be super secure. They have to keep track of what users are logged in. Something that's a little less secure by nature, Facebook, they use tokens instead of sessions. And the beauty of using tokens rather than sessions is that you can have a pretty much unlimited number of users logged in at once without taking up space on the network to keep a session open. So that's one of the advantages of this. It is, slightly less secure in general than a session, because if a session breaks, then the user will have to log in again. And a session breaking may indicate a potential man-in-the-middle attack or something like that. Whereas with these tokens, it's kind of difficult to keep track of it being the same computer logged in. You can check the IP address every time in order to negate that. But man-in-the-middle attack is where you have one system communicating with a server that's the attack server, and that is forwarding all requests between the two computers and reading everything that's going into them. So that's what a man-in-the-middle attack is, and tokens are susceptible to that more so than sessions. However, the workaround for that is rotating tokens. We're not going to be doing that. I'm just saying this to, let you know what the advantages and disadvantages of this method is. But this is what most sites use, simply because it's less expensive. So without talking anymore, we're going to set username, and that's going to be required. And the type is going to be a string, capital string. Password, and this should be hashed, and we can do this later, but a password can just be in plain text for now. Again, we want to hash this so that even the people who own the database don't know what the real passwords are. But for less complexity, we're just going to do this. So it's going to be required true and type of string. Although hashing really actually isn't that complex. We could pull in an npm module to do that for us, but for now, plain text. And token, if they have one. So a token wouldn't exist if the user's not logged in. So this is actually not going to be required. Required false. And actually, we can make this a complex type if we want. So we're going to do that. So a complex type would be, and let's actually name the session. Again, not a session, but that's what we're going to name it. So I want to make this a complex type because there's going to be two things with the token. For one, the token itself, and for two, I want to know when it was issued so that we can have it expire after, maybe 15 minutes of an activity. So we can do, well, not issued, but token. And again, that's going to be a string. And when we don't use this syntax to declare a type for Mongo, it's implied that it's not required. So this isn't required. We're just going to leave it at that. And we're going to use last action, and that's going to be a date object. So last action, we're going to update that whenever the user does stuff. And you know what? I'm actually not going to make this a complex type because this will actually be more complicated. So we're just going to do this token string and last action dates. I also made a little mistake here. So it's implied that both of these are not required. And last action is something we're going to use to expire the tokens if a user attempts to do a thing, but they were inactive for too long. So whenever we create that middleware that authenticates a user, we're going to be checking this last action date as well. So now we got that model set up, and user schema, user model, all that stuff got changed up. Also, let me just open the chat window. Yeah, if I'm going too fast, let me know. Got a lot of ground to cover in this lesson. So, and I'm going to go ahead and delete the employee model. We don't need that anymore. And services, we can get rid of this guy. We can get rid of employee under services as well. And because we deleted this, we got to get rid of all these endpoints so that the app doesn't crash when we start it up. And not yarn. I'm used to yarn. npm start, I think I set it to. No, I want npm dev, run dev, because we're using nodemon. There we go. So I don't have to keep starting and stopping it. Let's get postman up. 1 second, it's taking a minute. Whoa, there we go. Come on now. And I just like to test to make sure that this is still working. So send, I should get, gets. I should get Pong back. All right, so my API is still, oh. Why did this happen? So I got an error here, and I don't know why. That's weird. Am I console logging something somewhere? Server.js. I don't know why this logged. Anyway, I'm just going to restart it. Oh, yeah, look at that. Thank you, C4. There was a console log there. So anyway, everything's still working nice. So let's make our new service, our new user service. In fact, I'm going to name this authentication, authentication.js. So first thing is we need to import our new user model. So const user model equals require models user model. And I think I named the export user model. Yes, I did. And first thing we need to do is create. So const create user equals async. And this will be yeah, so I'm going to make a controllers folder so that we could just make this a regular function, but it's going to take in username and password. That's all it's going to do. And yeah, so const new user equals new user model, username and password. I'll just copy this. And we need it to save new user.save. And because so I don't think we did this last time, but services and controllers, I believe I've explained that before, but a controller is the thing that's the function that Express uses, and the service is just a function that takes in the parameters it needs, nothing more, nothing less, and does whatever it needs to do. And then there should be a try catch around this as well, but for now I'm not going to do that. I also forgot to await. So I'll just have this return true and assume that it always works for now, for time's sake. But again, you want to make sure that the username and password, they're both strings, they're both valid. And the controller is going to handle a lot of that. If we don't send a username or password in the request, then it's just not going to do the thing. And also here, I talked about hashing. We can go ahead and hash the password right now and save that instead of the actual plain text password that the user is sending us. But again, for time's sake, we won't be doing that. And we can do a update last action. So the point of this function will be, and this will be the middleware function. And you know what? I'm going to save that for middleware. We're just going to do this and make sure that it works. So module.exports equals create user. And we'll import that stuff up here. So const create user equals require. Oh, right. I'm going to make the controller. So new folder, controllers. And we'll just put this all in one file as well. So Authenticationcontroller.js. So we don't need to import the model. All we need to do is import this function that we just created. So const create user equals require services authentication. So const create user controller equals async, and this is the function that we'll be giving directly to Express. So rec res next. So here we're going to pull the new username and password from the request, and should go without saying, but we don't want the request to be in the URL itself. That would be bad. So we're not going to be using a query for this. We're going to be using a body, because a body, we're not doing HTTPS here, but in HTTPS, the URL is not encrypted, whereas the body is. So if someone's got a sniffer on your network, or even the network of this service, which would be bad, but if that happened, they can see the URLs and they wouldn't have to know what the key is to decrypt that, and they could see the username and password, and then they own your account. So we're going to be grabbing this from the body. So const, and we'll just use destructuring for this. Username password equals rec.body. This isn't as safe as doing something like const username equals rec.body.username. So because if they don't send a username or a password, then one of these is going to be undefined. Whereas we can set like a default value, but we can also just do this. If username or password, if either of these are undefined, then we're going to do a rest.send 400 for bad request, or sorry, .status for bad request, .send invalid username or password. And then we want to, there we go. We want to fire off next in case we have a middleware that runs after this, and return so that none of the rest of the code in this file runs if this case happens. Otherwise, we can go ahead and call create user. So wait, create user, username and password. And rest.send user created. Again, we're kind of assuming that, nothing here throws an error, but, just know that you should be doing that, of course. Modules or module.exports equals create user controller. So now we can hook this up to an endpoint. So app, in fact, yeah, I made a mistake here. I didn't want to do that, but create user controller instead. Controllers / authentication controller. App dot post is what I'm going to use for this. Create user, and we'll give it that controller. So now we should be able to create our user in the database. So yeah, still running. Create user. This is a post. Body, get rid of this. Username, MAWEIN. And I won't give it a password just to make sure that that error condition works. And it does, invalid username or password. At least it works for username, but safe to assume it also works for password. Am I going too fast at all? Is everybody on the same page right now? All right, seeing nothing in the chat, hearing no voices, password 1, 2, 3, 4. Send. All right, user's been created, and we can use where is it? MongoDB Compass to verify that. If it'll open, there we go. Oh God, it opened like 8 windows. All right, I still have my connection string for this, so connect. And I should see that our new collection has been created. All right, so I see users, I see MAWEIN and 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these other databases so we can drop collection, and it does a little chicken test for when you delete a collection to make sure that you're sure. So you got to type the name of the collection before you drop it, and we'll get rid of geese. Not going to lie, I'm kind of impressed that that actually worked. Goose to geese instead of gooses or something. But yeah, we've got our username and our password. And again, I am the database administrator for this one, so I can see what the password actually is. That's a no-go, but we'll figure out hashing later after we create all these endpoints. So we got the user created. Now we'd like an endpoint that can log a user in. So we're going to create a new service for that. Const login equals async. And again, it's going to take a username and a password. And we're going to use a query to look up this user and make sure their password matches. So const, and there's another way we can do this too. We can use the query to check if an account exists with both that matching username and password. However, that would send a potentially well, actually, that would be safe because it's encrypted either way, and the password's going to be moving through the network. So never mind, forget I was about to say that. But const user or just user equals awaits user model dot find, and we're going to find it based on the username. And that's something I forgot to talk about actually. So usernames should be unique. Forgot about that. So we can tell Mongoose that we don't want any other listings with the same username. And we can update that right here. So unique is true. So if someone attempts to create another user with the same username that already exists, we should get an error. It'll probably crash the app right now because I don't have a try catch, but let's give that a shot real quick and see what happens. Yep, so connection refused. I crashed the app. But that happened because, and it's not showing. There we go. Duplicate key error in collection. Username, duplicate key, Mawine. So we just enforce the uniqueness on that username, and we're not trying, or we're not doing a try catch around that. So it crashed the app and it restarted thanks to NodeMon. Well, yeah, whatever. But that's unique. So we're finding that one user. So C4, I think it's better to enforce it in the model. So his question is it better to enforce that in the model or through the endpoint? And you could do both, but you definitely want it on the model, because if you have another endpoint that creates a user or modifies a user doing whatever, then you would have to make sure that enforcement is in place in both endpoints. And if any condition of that enforcement changes, then you have to remember to change it in both. And in a code base like this, it's super small and it's not going to get that much bigger. That's probably all right. But if it's in the model, then you are just never able, no matter how many different endpoints you have modifying that user, if that makes sense. So in general, with databases, if you've got any rules that the data itself has to follow and you're able to do it in the database, it's better to do it there than in code, because first of all, that saves us work. And it negates the need for everybody who's working on the code to be an expert in how that data is supposed to look. Because I've been on apps, especially at Bayer with agricultural stuff. I don't know ag, but we were given what the rules are for the data and how they should look. We put that in the database. In some cases, we made a whole function in Postgres to make that happen. And we never had to worry about it again. If we made that mistake, and God knows I did several times, then the data is not going to get screwed up because of it. So yeah, you can do it in both though, because Mongoose will throw an exception. So you have to be able to at least handle it whenever something bad happens. So in this case, I would just do a try catch and return a 500. And I'm not going to detail what went wrong in this case, but you can read up on the documentation for what kind of errors it's going to throw and what the, so you can see this has, error 11,000. There might be another key or username one dupe key. It'll say this in the error. So you can fish for that, and you can tell the user that the username already exists based off of that. But again, we're just going to do a 500. And I'm not going to do that now. So great question though. So we have our user. In fact, I'm going to do a find one, because find is going to return an array. And if that array is empty because the username doesn't exist, then I don't want to have to code for that. And try to access the 0th element of an empty array. So find one is just going to return one. And that'll be, the user will be the object instead of an array. So if user, we still do need to check. I just don't like accessing like explicit elements in an array. That's just me. But if user exists, then you know what I'm going to do if not user. It's going to do rest dot status, and I'm just going to do a 400 again, or no, 404 dot send username doesn't exist. And also for security reasons, I'm getting a lot into security here, but you don't even want to do this, because a hacker, this will be useful to a hacker, because they can use this endpoint to try and log in. And even if they fail to log in, they know the username doesn't exist, or worse yet, they know one does exist, and then they can focus on those. So when you write these endpoints, you actually don't want to be explicit. You can just say bad username or password. You don't want to let anyone know that if the user exists or not. So that's what we're going to do here. And then we'll do the next and return. But if the user does exist, then we're going to compare that password. And if that password's bad, we're going to do exactly the same thing. In fact, I'm going to do 401 there. But we're going to send the exact same message so that it's not clear why it failed. So if user.password does not equal password, then again, we can do this exact same thing. In fact, because this is the same code, we can do this. Or, so if user doesn't exist, then it's not going to invoke this side of the operation. And that's important because if user is undefined and it attempts to access password, this is going to crash. And then we're not going to get any response from the server. So you want to make sure that this guy is first. If you want to be extra safe, you can go back to the 2 separate if statements, but this will work just as well. Now, we want to create a token, and I'm probably going to use a random number generator for it, as well as update the last action, because a login is, of course, an action. So I'll do the last action thing first. So const new last action equals new date. Simple as that. And the token, so we can use stuff from npm token generator. So UUID is actually probably better, but UUID is meant for IDs, not tokens. But you do, of course, want these to be unique. So this first one that I'm looking at, it's probably fine. Yeah, so simple as that. Token generator dot generate. Easy. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to kill this and download token generator. Of course, one thing I will say, for our purposes, this is just fine, but this was published 7 years ago. It does have an okay amount of weekly downloads, not a whole lot, but this token generator, we would want to evaluate to make sure that the tokens end up being unique, because you don't want to run into 2 different users with the same token at the same time. Obviously, that's going to become a problem. But again, we're only going to have like 2 users in the system right now. When you do the project, I would actually probably find something else. Randomized string is probably good. Yeah. So yeah, that looks like a pretty decent token to me. So I'm actually going to download this one instead. And I'll go ahead and paste this in the channel. So this one was published 3 months ago. It's got far less weekly downloads, but again, I want something that's a little more recent. So we're just going to use this. And we can go back in the package JSON, get rid of token generator. All right. And of course, you can also make your own token generator, because so you can use hashing, and there's plenty of great libraries for that. You can hash a combination of the time, like create a string of whatever the current date is. So new last action dot to ISO string and username. So you can create a hash out of this, and that's pretty reliably going to be unique across users, because you not only have the separate time, so it'll be different for this user every single time that this gets invoked, but it'll also have their username in it, and collision with a good hashing algorithm is going to be very unlikely. But again, we're just going to keep it simple. So I'm going to import that. I already forgot what it was called. Randomized string. We're going to import randomized string. So const, and then let's look at that doc again to see how they do it. So I'll just copy this code here. And I'm going to get rid of the semicolons. I hate semicolons, but random string equals require randomized string. And we're going to copy this function down into const new token equals randomized string generate. Now, if there is a pre-existing token and they hit the login endpoint again, then that's fine. It's just going to, erase that old token. So we're going to do await user model find by, I'm going to do find by ID and update. And we've got the ID. User will have its ID. So user._ID. And we're going to give it the new parameters. So the token is going to be, and I can just name this token so I don't have to do that. And last action, and I'll just get rid of new last action. And then once that's done, it can return the token back to the user. So not return. No, yeah, return, because this isn't the controller. So token. So the controller is going to run this. And if, oh, you know what? I'm an idiot. Because this isn't the controller. So I'm going to copy this, but just get rid of this and return empty string, indicating that maybe the username or password was wrong. And the controller can look at what the return value is and either return the token, or if it's an empty string, return a bad password or something. In fact, I'm going to do undefined. And we'll export the login function. So yeah, we're going to find the username. If it doesn't exist or the password's bad, it's going to return undefined and the controller will handle that. Otherwise, it's going to create the last action and token, update the user model so that they are logged in, and return the token so the controller can return that back to the user. So we can go into controllers, import the login function, login controller equals async rec res next. And same thing, const result equals await login, username, password. Copy this up here because again, we want this coming in from the body. We don't want it in the URL as a query. That'd be bad. So if results rest.status 401.send bad username or password, next and return. And otherwise, it's going to do a rest.send result. And just for clarity, I'm actually going to rename this to token. So if it just doesn't return a token, it can assume rightfully that, it's a bad username and password and it's not returning anything. Otherwise, just send the token. And also, I want to make sure that next is called. Yeah, and Andy, JSON Web Token, that's a good one too. Well, JWT is somewhat of an older standard. It's kind of easier to break. I know because I've successfully broken them in my master's. So I don't know if I would use that, but just for a simple login token, maybe. I'll have to get back to you on that and kind of look that up. A lot of this is kind of subject to what the cybersecurity community thinks is the best way to do it. I think right now they're kind of landed on, I forget the name of the stupid hash, but they want you to use a hash because it's guaranteed to be unique, and hashes are by design a lot harder to reverse engineer than something like a JSON Web Token. Although JSON Web Token does do hashing, but I'll have to look up some documentation and see what the community says. But login controller. So we're exporting this and we're going to attach it to our endpoint and give it a shot. So app.post. Yeah, and C4, like MD5, SHA, seems like it would be taxing for generating tokens. It is by design. The reason why it's so taxing is because when you're trying to break into a system and like get all the password hashes changed to actual passwords, there's no reversing it, at least at the moment. Instead, you have to come up with a whole list of passwords that already exist or that people know people use as passwords, like the RockU word list. Look that up. It's a big file, but it's got a lot of really annoyingly common passwords, like people's birthdays and stuff. And they literally create a SHA hash of every single one of them and compare it to the breached password list. Because the list of passwords that you can break out of, Bank of America, they're going to be hashed. So you got to hash all of those common passwords. If you find hashes that match, then you've broken the password. And the fact that it takes a while for the hashing algorithm to actually run, I mean, in computing time anyway, it takes like half a second to hash it. But if you're trying to hash literally billions of common words to find those hashes, you want it to take as long as possible so that, for one, the company who was breached has time to warn their users to change their passwords so that they're no longer good anyway. And yeah, that's a feature, not a bug. MD5, it's fast, but MD5 sucks. It's really easy to break an MD5 hash. So don't ever use MD5. What was I doing now? Login. So I'm going to create the login endpoint and login controller, which I did not import yet. There we go. So now I should be able to log in and see the token in our database. Right now, there is no token and there is no date. So log in. And I'm going to change this to 123 just to make sure the password matching part works. Cool. I'm going to change this to a different username to make sure that that this portion works without crashing. Cool. And now I'm going to log in with the real username and password. So I've got back a token, looks good to me. And in our database, I should be able to refresh this and see that there is now a token and a last action. Perfect. So now we can create a log out endpoint as well, which will be super easy. In fact, we don't even need a password to log out. So const logouts equals async username. And all that will do is find the user. If the user doesn't exist, then it's just going to return true, because again, we don't want to indicate at all that the user doesn't exist. And of course, we're not comparing the password. And we'll just do return. It can just it doesn't need to send a verification that the thing happened. And we'll do this, and we'll change token to undefined and last action to undefined as well. And that's it. That's all we need to do for the logout endpoint. Again, we don't want to let anyone know that the username exists. We might want to add a password because this kind of enables anybody to log anybody out. But for our purposes, again, it's quite all right. So that's, I don't know why I copied that. Log out. And create the controller for that as well. And I'll just copy login controller and import log out controller. There is no token. We're just taking in the username from rec.body and calling the logout function. Logged out. All right, so all it's doing, it's calling the logout function. There's no indication of whether or not it was successful, and we're just sending rest.send logged out no matter what happens in there, so that it doesn't tell anybody that that username exists. So we can go to app.js, logout controller, app.post, and pretty much all these are going to be posts, logout controller. log out. And I'm not even going to change, I'm not going to remove password. It doesn't matter. But I'll send that and I should get a, how did that happen? All right, it wasn't listening. That's weird. Logged out. Cool. We can go to our database, refresh. Uh-oh. That's not right. Hang on. I did something wrong here. Maybe I don't want it to be undefined. Maybe empty string and empty string. Well, actually, I can just null out the token. That should have deleted it, but it didn't. Well, anyway, if it's an empty string, then we can check for that as well when we check the login credentials. So logged out again and refresh, no token. All right, well, there's a way to delete those, but I'm not going to look it up now. But we can just check if the token is an empty string or if it doesn't exist at all. But if we do a, when we check the token for our middleware, then we can just do a exclamation mark token, and empty string is going to register as true as well as undefined. So that's fine. So now let's make an endpoint, just an endpoint that can mimic one that you need specific permissions for. So app.get secret rec res next. Now, the thing about these middleware functions is if I do an app.use like up here, it's going to apply to all of these endpoints, including these endpoints here. And I don't necessarily want this behind authentication either. So instead of putting this endpoint in this file, I can make a router file that'll have all the secret stuff. So I'm going to do that instead. So I will just create a new file here at the top. Actually, I don't have anything specifically in mind, so I'll just do I'll just call this stuff, whatever. But otherwise, this could be stuff like get account information or what have you. So I'll just put an endpoint here that all it does is return some text, but it's going to be behind a authentication middleware. So new file. And this will be called getStuff.js. Again, super simple endpoint, const get stuff controller equals rec res next. And it'll just do rest.send secret next. Module.exports get stuff controller. And now I'll make the router file for this folder. So new folder, router.js. And that's going to create a new Express app that's going to be like a subordinate to this app. We've gone over this before, so we'll just copy this up here. And we'll create that authentication middleware. And question, is it usually better to do all this stuff manually, or is it usually better to use something like Express Generator to get a base plate? So I'm doing it manually for learning purposes, but you can definitely use pre-existing script because that's exactly what we're using for our UIs. But if you do that, then you kind of lose out on how it works. And if you needed to do something other than what a base, what a boilerplate generator is doing, then you still need to know how to modify it. So with React, when we use the create React app generator, I'm doing that because setting up a React app manually is a surprising amount of work. You got to configure Webpack, which by itself is a whole task. I've done that myself before just to do it, and it took me like a week and a half because I'm not familiar with Webpack enough as I should be. So getting it to recognize a CSS file was the bane of my existence for like 3 days. So that's why we're doing it there. But you are losing out on, how Webpack works for one, and how Babel also works, which is a plugin that Webpack accepts and things like that. Whereas with Express, there's really not that much boilerplate. But we're doing it from scratch just to show you. If you want to use a boilerplate, then test them out, make sure that they do what you want them to do first, and you're more than welcome to use those on your practice statements and your actual competition. Great question. So we will import the get stuff endpoint that we just created. Const get stuff controller, not from. I'm thinking about Babel now, so I'm like missing from. So we got the get stuff controller app.get secret endpoint. Get stuff controller. And we want to export this. So module.exports equals app. And we will import that into our base app up here. So const stuff router is what I'll call it, equals require stuff router. And then we'll do an app.use, and it doesn't matter where you put this really, but app.use stuff router. I just like to put stuff like that at the bottom because these are like the top level endpoints and these are all the subordinate endpoints under it. So yeah, in this router, and also you may notice like when we went over this before, we could give it like a path as well, but we're not going to do that for now. You can also just give it the router itself without the path, and it's just going to add all of the endpoints under it to the base path. So when I run secret endpoint, it'll be at the top level. And right now it's unprotected. Oops. And it's a get endpoint. So it's going to return secret right now. So now we can write that middleware to make sure that whoever is trying to get in there is authorized to do so. So app, and I'll just write it right here too. App.use, and we'll just give it the function rec res next. And here we could check the username and password, but that would kind of kill the point of the token. So we want to get the token and the last action. Make sure the last action isn't too far away. And we want to update that last action as well, because by hitting this endpoint and this middleware, they are performing an action that will keep them logged in, right? So we want to update that as well. And you know what? I'm going to do this in its own file. In fact, I'm going to do this in the authentication service. That just makes more sense. So I'll just delete that for now. Authentication, and it'll just be called authenticate. Const authenticate equals async, and it'll take in the token. And again, the token should be unique. In fact, we could enforce that on our model as well. For now, I'm not going to, but we can do the same thing here. Unique equals true for token, because we're going to search for the user by the token. So const user equals await user model dot find one token. And if there is no token or it's empty string, this will invoke either way, then we're going to return false. They are not authorized. And in fact, we can use the next function as well, but this is just the service, not the controller. So we'll just return true or false if they're authorized or not. So if there is no token, then they're not allowed to do the thing. Otherwise, oh, you know what? User.token equals token. That's what I want to do instead. So if the user token does not equal the token, so again, if this is, oh, and you know what? We also want to make sure that the token itself is not an empty string, because that's a possibility, right? So if token or user token does not equal token, and you know what? Let this be an or or an and. If there's no token or the token doesn't match. Yeah, so this is an or. So we're going to return false, meaning that whoever's trying to get in there is not authorized. And we're also making sure that we're checking for that empty string because I wasn't able to actually delete the token. Next, we want to check if the token is expired or not. So usually I think the recommended approach is inactivity of 15 minutes will log you out, but you could set it to whatever you want. So const date equals new date. And we're going to compare the current date to the date that's listed in the user. So if date minus user dot date is greater than, and I think this is in milliseconds. So let's do, we're going to set it to like 30 seconds. So what would that be? 3,000. Just so we can see it in action. So 3,000 return false because that token has expired, right? And if none of that is true, if the date is good, and you know what? I want to do if date and because, and you should probably check the validity of the date too, but if the date is actually not in there, then obviously the token's expired or, you know, there shouldn't be a token. It shouldn't get past this, but we also want to check that the date is actually there. And then we want to compare, oh, you know what? I'm an idiot, user dot date. So we want to check that the user object has a date on it and then check, you know, how far it's been or how long it's been since the last action. And it's not even date, it's last action. There we go. I'm getting confused. All right, so we're checking last action, making sure that it's within the last 30 seconds, and we'll update this to like 15 minutes. But otherwise, they're authenticated. Now we want to update the last action. So await user model dot find one or find by ID and update user dot underscore ID and last action date. And finally, we'll return true. And also, I want to make sure that the user actually exists. Because if both of these end up being undefined, then that's also a problem if the user doesn't exist. Obviously, you know, we want an actual user attached to this. So we'll just do that in a separate if statement. If there's no user, return false. So this is a little complicated. There's a lot of stuff that we have to check, but we have to make sure the user exists. The token that we were given is a good token. And I believe this random string has a verified token, or maybe I was thinking of the other package, but we would want to, you know, make sure the token is a legit token as well. But in this case, we don't really have to. But yeah, we want to make sure we were given a token in the first place. User.token needs to equal the token that we were given, the one that, you know, it was found. In fact, I just ran into another thing. This doesn't make sense because these would be equal just by the user returning. So we can even get rid of this. And also before we even do a lookup, we would probably want to make sure that we were given a good token as well. So that'll save us some network calls. So yeah, if we're not given a token, it won't even make the call. So yeah, you have to think about this stuff a little bit. But if the user doesn't come back, return false, token's bad, and then we check the last action and make sure that the last action is not expired, not too long ago. And then update the last action and return true. And that's how we authenticate. So we'll export this. And of course, we have to make a controller for this. So we'll just do it in Authentication Controller. Authenticate controller equals async rec res next. And this controller will, of course, serve as a middleware, but it's the same exact syntax as the rest. So const token equals rec.body. Await authenticate, which is not, there it is. So we have to make sure that authenticate is in here, token, and set the result to that. So const result equals await authenticate token. So if this returns false, then we want to stop the flow, right? So if result, then we're going to do a rest.send. We will not be hitting the next function because we don't want, because next in this case is going to be the get stuff endpoint that we created. It's telling Express to continue. We want to, where to go? We want to stop it in its tracks. So we will not be calling next, but we will be doing a rest.status 401.send unauthorized. And then we'll return to exit. And otherwise, if the result is good, then we'll do next. We're not going to do rest.status or anything like that because this is not a terminal endpoint, a terminal function. So we're just giving it the all clear to continue. So we'll export this. In fact, I'm not going to name this controller. I'm going to name this middleware, so we know what it is. And then in this router here, we can import authentication middleware equals require. Go to our services, or not services, sorry, controllers and authentication controller. And before we do the app.get, we want to set app.use authentication control or middleware. So is everyone with me? Apologize for the speed. I'm trying to get this done before 6:30. But is everybody with me? Is everyone in the same place right now? All right. So now we can hit that secret endpoint. I'm not providing a token, so that middleware should fire and tell me that I'm not allowed. Unauthorized. And we can look at our logs and we can see that nothing else fired. So I don't have anything console logged, but if I did have next in our authentication controller at the end of this here, where it's otherwise unauthorized, I would probably see an error in get stuff because it's trying to append the response when it was already sent. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to put next here. Don't do this in your own code. Taking a minute to reconnect to Mongo. There we go. So cannot set headers after they are sent. So that's because although it was unauthorized, it tried to run the get stuff. It tried to append the response, but it was already gone. So that's what that means. So we are not calling that. We're just returning and letting Express know that we're done running because it failed the authentication. So now we're actually going to provide it a token, which will require me to log in and hit secret endpoint really quick. So I'm just going to make a second one of these. So post body, I'll just copy this over. JSON. And I won't hit login yet. I'm just going to provide its token and show that although the token is correct, the time has passed for the expiration. There is no token, of course. So I actually do have to log in. Send. Here's our token. Secret endpoint. What? Uh-oh. Something did not work. So the token's in there. I'm guessing that I did the date algorithm, the date calculation wrong. So let's console log that. So, oh, greater than, I'm an idiot. I want less than. Yeah, so if it's been more than 30 seconds, you can log in. So my mistake. So now that that's done, I should still be logged in. Action refused. Oh. There we go. So it's been more than 30 seconds probably, but secret. And we can look at our timestamp. You can see that it changed when I hit refresh. So now I'm just going to wait 30 seconds. I'm going to hit it again and make sure that that the token expires. I should probably have set it to more like 5, but here we are. But is this all making sense, the token thing? Like I said, you're going to want to do something like this for logging into your practice statement endpoints. Like historically, I think kudos have been given for using a token sort of format rather than just username and password for every protected endpoint. I know a lot of the other teams have done that in the past and they got points off for it. So it's important that you do this. And also for the practice problem statement, obviously, oh crap. I'm going to set this to 5 seconds so that we're not waiting so long. Wait, 3,000 should be 3 seconds. I'll do 5. And also, I'm pretty certain I did this wrong. So let me just see what that turns out to be. Ugh. Come on, Mongo. There we go. So that comes, whoa, that's a number. That's definitely not right. So that implies it was 41 seconds. That one was only 7. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, so this is not, I do want this greater than, because that's the condition that returns false. So, oh, come on, Mongo. There we go. All right, so I got it to expire. It expires really, really, really quickly, and it doesn't update that timestamp. So we could see this time since expiration is going up because it's not updating it. But if I log in again and I immediately, I'm not going to be fast enough. It's still going to be unauthorized because I put it for 5 milliseconds. Oh, why did that happen? You know what? It might be using. I bet I know what's going on there. So I'm using app.use and it should only apply to secret endpoint. But for some reason, it might be applying to the rest of the service, which it shouldn't be doing. I have it at the bottom, so that endpoint shouldn't even be invoked until these are already set. So why is that happening? Does that only happen on the login? Yes, it does. So I did something wrong here. Let's just see if this is firing. Come on. Nope, it's elsewhere. So it's not firing the authentication. That's good. But it's doing something else when it logs in. Why? Anybody see anything obvious that I'm missing? So it's hitting the login controller. It's running the login service. It's not doing any REST stuff. I don't have any middleware other than this. But this should be running before, not after. Let me just see. Come on. Still getting it.
Cannot set header after that sent.
Where is that happening? So the login controller.
Search for a header throughout your code base.
For header, well, it'll say set headers after they're sent no matter what. So a rest.send is firing twice is what I think is happening, but I'm not sure where. So something's happening after login controller. So maybe if I just get rid of next, then that won't happen. But then, you know, what's happening after login controller, that's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that no longer happens. I don't know what's going on there. It's weird. Because authentication middleware, that's definitely not running because the console log didn't fire. And then login controller, we've got a app.no.
Do you still have that console log on authentication middleware?
No, I can add that back in real quick. Where is it? So login controller, get next back in, next. Well, the good news is we've got everything that I wanted to cover today. But why is this happening? So the one problem that I do have with Express is that it doesn't say what tried to send the header. It's just internal Express code where it's firing that problem. So it doesn't show where, like what file it's actually leading in from, like where the rest.send is that it's apparently firing. So yeah, that console log is not running in authentication. So that's not the one that's firing. So I don't know what's going on. Is anyone else seeing that on their end, or is it just me?
And then where are your routes?
So we've got this router here and the primary router here.
Okay. And you're just invoking those. That is app.get on this route.
I'm actually going to do this real quick and see. Because if the problem's in here, then I'm not going to see the header sent thing. Oh, come on, Mongo, what are you doing? There we go. So I'm no longer seeing it. So yeah, the problem is definitely in this router, but it's not firing authenticate.
Is that where the stuff router is pointing?
Yeah, this is the file. So I'm thinking it's here. It's got to be here, right? But it shouldn't. But it's not running that middleware, so it's the weirdest thing. Oh, you know what? Maybe it is because I was doing that in the service, but it wouldn't even. No, it would. Huh? That is so weird. It's always going to be something stupid and obvious. I swear to God. Yeah, look at that. But it's not firing those console logs, so I don't know. Weird. Well, I'm not too concerned about it. I guess if that's a problem, then this is a terminal endpoint, so we can just get rid of next. Same thing up here. So Again, next is only something you want to use in a middleware function where there's going to be another function chained after it. So somehow next is getting attached to something else, and I don't know what, but whatever. Once I get rid of that, we no longer have this issue. So yeah, that's our tokening. So I think one last thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to do this kind of quickly, is add different user types and create a middleware that can determine if someone is allowed to hit a particular endpoint, because there may be endpoints that you have that are for administrators only. And we're going to create one that'll just dump all of the users. And then we only want admins to see that. Whereas a regular old user, their user type may just be user. So let's add that. In fact, I think when we first talked about Mongo, we did exactly that. So we're going to have a user type. Do I want to call it type? What do I want to call it? How about rights, access rights? So rights is going to be a string array, because an admin user, they may want to have other types of users associated and otherwise, but we're just going to have two types, I think. In fact, it's just going to be one. So type is going to be a type string. And we're going to use enum to set what kinds of users we can have in our system. So the first would be admin, the next would be user, and there could be more, but for simplicity, we're going to leave it at this. So when we create our user by default, we could set a default value. They're going to be a user. So if they don't send a username, or rather, they're only going to send a username and password, but by default, they're going to be a user. And this is also good for security because create user endpoint, we probably don't want to add in what type they are. We only want the database administrator to be able to make someone an admin in general, or have an endpoint specifically for that. So for now, everyone's just going to be a user. In fact, because we added this new key, and let's say we have a bunch of users before we add that type of key in, we won't have anything here. So we can assume that undefined is just a type user in our code to make up for that. Or we can add them all retroactively. Depends on what you want to do. So for now, we've got admin and user. Let's create a second user that isn't me, and I'll make myself an admin. So we'll just add it here. Create user. That'll be a post. Username equals what are the first couple letters of your last name, Risha? I'll just name it Risha. And your password is going to be 4321. So we'll create that user created, verifying the database. And the type is going to be user. I'll just change you to an admin. And we'll create an endpoint that is for your eyes only. So we'll just put that in the get stuff endpoint. Honestly, I'm not going to make a whole new file for this, but I'm going to put that in authentication because this is related to this. So const get users equals async. And all this will do is dump all of the users. So const users equals user awaits user model dot find dot leen. And I'm not going to worry about getting rid of the version or whatever for speed's sake. Return users. We'll export get users. And again, we want this to be only visible to admins. So we can use it a custom middleware just for that. So I'm going to create it in the same file. But first I'm going to make sure that this works. Actually, I'm going to create it in this file, but get users. Const get user controller. We'll say sync rec next. And we'll just return the result of get users. So const users equals await get users. And again, it seems kind of weird the first time you see this to have everything separated in controllers and services. But trust me, when you have a lot of endpoints that you're working with and maybe services call one another, you don't want to have to, call the endpoint that has rec, res, and next in it. That's kind of annoying. So we have these completely separate from our services, rest.send users. And we'll export the get user controller. And this may be similar to something that you'll be doing in the practice statements. So in our routes, we'll go ahead and have this at the top level. So get users controller app.gets /users. All right. So again, right now this is open to literally everybody. So when I call the get users endpoint, and I think it just named it users just now, I'm going to get connection refused because something went wrong here. Requires a callback function, but got option or object undefined. So I spelled something wrong here. Get user controller. I'm going to change this actually to users just because user implies I'm only getting one, whereas I'm getting many. So that should work now. Get connected to Mongo, hurry up. Come on, we only got 5 minutes. Let's do this. There we go. So we got both of our users. Now, again, we don't want anyone other than an admin to see this. So for the authentication function, I'm going to set this to 50,000. I don't really know off the top of my head how long that is, but we want enough time to actually do this. To log in as reach in, hit that endpoint. So in Authentication Controller, we're going to create a new middleware const check privileges. How about check user type? And this is going to be a weird function, right? So it's going to be a function that will return a function. And the reason we want to do it that way is because we want to be able to see what, like maybe we want to give an array of users that are acceptable. And we don't want to do that by appending the request object. We want to return a function that will handle the rec, res, and next objects. It sounds confusing, but there's a reason we do it this way. So check user type. It's going to take in a allowed types array. So in this case, it'll just be array with admin, but maybe we want admins and users allowed. So this will return rec, res, next. It'll check the type of the user, and we're going to have to import the user model. So const user model equals require model models user model. And of course, this will be an asynchronous function too. So const user equals await user model dot find token, and we'll get that token from the request body object. So const token equals rec.body. And if user.type, if allowed types.includes user.type next. And otherwise return and don't do anything. We don't need return. So what this is doing is it's creating a brand new middleware function based upon the allowed types. Now, again, we could also just make a middleware that doesn't return a function, so it's a little less confusing, and just do rec, res, and next. But we would have to take an additional parameter for what types are allowed. So if I want to protect multiple endpoints based on the user type, then I would have to create a separate function or a separate middleware function to check if they're an admin or if they're or if they're a regular user, or if they're a maintainer, or whatever kind of user types that we end up having, right? So we can just call the check user type, and you know what, this should have been in the routes, but I'll just export this. Just like the other middleware. So yeah, this will be used in the route. So we'll go to the, this endpoint here. I believe it's in the same file. I already forgot. Now for get users, we'll put this right in the center. We want user types allowed to only be admins. So if I try to hit this endpoint with my account, it ain't gonna let me in. Otherwise, it'll let me get to the get user controller. And of course, I do have to be logged in. So that should be under authentication. So we want the authentication in there as well. So we will import this from Authenticate Middleware. And this is getting kind of long, so I would spread this out, but for now, because we're on a time constraint. There we go. So first it's going to authenticate. Are they even logged in? And then it's going to go to check user type using that token that was just verified before. You can have any number of functions that can chain like this. I think the hard limit is like, it's over 1,000. I remember doing a test to see if there was a limit, and there is, but it's impractical to even get that many. So don't worry about that, but it'll authenticate, it'll check the user type, and then it will finally get to the user controller if all else works. So I'm going to log in with my own first. In fact, I think I actually want to do another thing here. So if it's allowed, then it'll do next. Otherwise, rest.send, you're not allowed. Scrub. And not do next. So it'll just send back that response. So now that we've got that, let's, oh man. We're at the wire here. There we go. So I'm going to log in with my own username, which, of course, there we go. So I'll log in with mine. I've got my new token. I'll send that token in the request with users. Get rid of this username and password token. Now there are two different messages. The first one is going to be, not logged in or whatever it is, or username and password or token's bad. I forget what it is, but we got to that second middleware that said, you're not allowed. So we got past the actual authentication. Now it's checking my user type. Now, if I were to log in with Reach's credentials instead, 4321, she's an admin. She should be able to see the result of that endpoint. So if I just switch out these tokens, why? I did change that in the database, right? Yeah, so Reach is an admin. Console.log user type. It is type, right? Yeah, type equals admin. Hope everyone's cool with staying an additional 5 minutes. Undefined. Undefined. What do you mean it's undefined? Come on. You know what? On the route that I did invoke it, so it should be returning that function. Yeah. Oh, it's an array because I'm stupid. Okay. Yeah, that's why. So I want find one here. Third time's the charm, or fourth. I don't even know how many times I tried, but that should fix that. What? All right, well, we can leave it at this and we can continue next week while I figure out why this isn't working right now. Is everyone cool with staying another 5 minutes while we figure this out, or do you want to just continue next week? C4, you're good.
And he is thumbs up, so he's good too.
All right. You're not allowed. Okay, so it's getting to you're not allowed. It should be checking the user. So console.log user.type. So it's getting past the actual authentication. But for some reason, user.type appears to be either undefined or, yeah, so there's admin. That's cool. And it's going on to next, it seems. Oh, you know what? So it looks like it's doing both, but the send for you're not allowed is happening first. So we've got a race condition going on, but now we don't because I did return. So if I'm right, I'll explain further. There we go. Okay, so the reason that was happening, this was true. User.type was admin. It was great. It hit next. But when it went to next, it was firing the get users controller. Now this takes time to run. So it managed to send this first because we weren't returning and exiting the function before this could return. So then we got that can't send headers after they're sent problem because after this was already sent, then it tried to send this one, but the request was already back to us and it was saying you're not allowed. So yeah, that was confusing, but that's why that was happening. Now, if I try to log in with my credentials, I should see you're not allowed without any issues. All right, you're not allowed because I don't have the valid user type and I see no errors. So that's why that was happening. It was just a misplaced return statement and I was using find instead of find one. So yeah, now we're done. But that is authentication. And as you can see, that can take up a little bit of time. When you're doing the practice statement, you can definitely use this code that you've written on your site as well. I can go ahead and zip and post this project because the other people are going to want it anyway. But when you're doing the real competition, you'll have to write this kind of thing from scratch. So I would definitely study this code a little bit more and make sure you're fully aware of how it works. The login and the log out endpoints are good enough, but the middlewares is where it's going to get a little weird, as we saw. And again, I was rushing through this to try and get this done in an hour and a half. You'll have a little bit more time, but yeah, and I'm explaining it at the same time. So, but yeah, just study this code, make sure that you can do this pretty much from memory. You got a working knowledge of this because you'll be able to write it faster. And you're going to get a lot of good brownie points for making this happen. You'll have, because it's remote again, you'll have 2 days, I believe. I'll have to check with George, but you'll have 2 days to write this up. And it's going to be in sessions that are going to be monitored. We will not be allowed in there to coach you through it. You just have to know it. You're probably not allowed to use outside resources, but that's something I'll clarify with George so we know. And outside resources meaning you can't copy this code and just use it. But again, study this code, make sure you know how it works, make sure you get to the point where you're able to write this stuff out without any help, like pretty much what I just did, and you should be good to go. And of course, you always have the option to just go off of username and password alone without using a token, but that may cost you points. So just time management is what's coming into play there. And C4 asks, can we use things like previous GitHub projects? I'm going to say no. For your practice problem statement, you can, but I would use the practice statement as practice and try to write everything from scratch if you can, because that's pretty much what you're going to be expected to do in the real competition. And also, I'll just talk about the competition a little bit. In fact, I'm going to stop recording based on my